and welcome to The Natural View. I'm Maggie Jacqua. I'm the content director of WholeFoods Magazine, and I'm here with Todd Pauley of 24 Stories Marketing. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Maggie. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. And we have a special guest today. We have Bill Chioffi. He's the COO of Nammex. Welcome, Bill.
Hey, Maggie. How's it going? Love your background. Looks great.
Hey, Bill.
Thank you. Good to have you here. So a little background for our viewers. This podcast is part of our leadership series. So in our July 2024 issue of WholeFoods Magazine, we shine a spotlight on companies that are just leading the way in the natural products industry. We talk to the company leaders, and you can read that coverage for more information. But today we're going to dive a little deeper. We're going to talk to Bill about the company and some recent developments, some exciting stuff going on we can't wait to hear about. So let's just start at the beginning. For people who aren't familiar with Nammex, can you tell us a little bit about the company and what you guys are providing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nammex, it actually stands for North American Medicinal Mushroom Extracts. So that's a mouthful. Nammex has become the trade name for the business, and the business is organic mushroom extracts. And the founder of Nammex, Jeff Chilton, I guess around 30 years ago or so, founded the company, and he decided that, he had a background in mycology. So he started as a professional mycologist working on a commercial mushroom farm in Washington State, growing white button mushrooms. And then they were one of the first to start commercializing shiitake mushrooms and selling them fresh organic shiitake mushrooms for the grocery market, and then further drying them for use. And Jeff just continued to get interested in specialty crops with mushrooms and species that he knew were interesting from a traditional medicinal perspective, and also our psychoactive species. And that led him to some mushroom growing schools in Europe, the Dutch mushroom growing school in the Netherlands. And then, of course, he started attending conferences in China because of the rich tradition of medicinal mushrooms or functional mushrooms in China. Once he started to think about the ways that in the dietary supplement and food and beverage space, what would be required to fulfill the needs of a whole industry for organic extracts, which at the time in the, let's say, mid 80s, early 90s didn't really exist at any level. How am I going to supply that and also prove the quality, because it's coming from a foreign country, and even though it has a rich tradition, we need to be able to prove identity, purity, integrity, potency, same questions that they would ask of any botanical extract. So, I think Jeff's background in both growing mushrooms for a commercial purpose and then doing research on different strains, different growing techniques, has really benefited Nammex in the relationship of knowing how we can improve, how we can get maybe more activity out of the mushroom species that we're working on. And this is all on scale. We're talking hundreds of tons of species of mushrooms. That's and now Skye Chilton, Jeff's son, is the CEO of the company. Features he and Adam. I won't get into too much detail because the readers can have a look at that interview. It was great. But Skye is the CEO of Nammex and also of a brand called Real Mushrooms. And Adam Chilton is the director of brands for Nammex, and he also works on Real Mushroom side on the branding and marketing and supply chain side. So it's a family business and a smallish business for the amount of extracts that we're dealing with. It's just been really a joy to see Jeff celebrate in this revival or this shroom boom that we're in, because for years it was really a couple of species like reishi mushroom, Ganoderma lingji to maybe cordyceps a little, and then recently lion's mane has sort of overshadowed all of them.
So I can't wait to drop Shroom Boom into my next 10 conversation because that is awesome.
Yeah. I don't think I coined that one. I think that's been around a little bit, but it works well, doesn't it, Todd?
Yeah, that's the reason why I love doing this podcast. I learned so much, and that might have just made my top 5. So there's a lot to talk about as far as Nammex and mushrooms in general, but let's start with something pretty recent. You just got back from a trip to China, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the growers you met there, what that trip was like, where you went, what you saw, and then also the importance, for Nammex to go over and meet personally and explore where the regions are, where the mushrooms come from, and the rich history. Why is that important to you as a company?
Well, as I was describing in the company history, it's Jeff, in meeting with Chinese researchers, growers, and extractors in China very early on, he realized that their depth of knowledge and their ability to be able to supply these at volume to really primarily just the Chinese market. You have to realize, like, they're struggling just to feed their people alone, right? So any exports are secondary and usually a lot smaller. But the trip to China was really an annual visit to audit either a farm or the facility. The facility is audited by independent agencies, third party, for quality and let's say sustainability or responsible business practices. But the farms also get those inspections. But it's important for us physically to be able to interact with the farm and the extraction facility to check that supply chain the way that you would with any sort of vertically integrated supply chain where the producer is buying directly from the grower. So we saw on this trip a species, Trametes versicolor, or turkey tail, as its common name is. And we also saw golden oyster mushroom and cordyceps. So we saw 3 different farms in 2 different regions of, let's say, northern China, Heilongjiang province, which is the turkey tail farm, which was sort of the furthest north that we got. We were about, 200 kilometers from the Russian border in sort of like Siberia is right over the border, where you would think of being banished to Siberia, to the Siberian forest. So, and agroforestry is a major part of their economy in that area. It's rural. I saw nothing but trees, and makes sense that that's a mushroom growing area, as there are many throughout the vast landscape of China. But turkey tail is a mushroom that, well, it's not a culinary species as well. It's quite well known for its, say, medicinal properties, but it's not one that can also be eaten like shiitake with your stir fry. And so these farmers actually are incentivized by the Chinese government in specialty crops, the same way specialty crops are incentivized by USDA and other agroforestry crops. They highly incentivize this because they know the farmers can make a better profit on these specialty mushrooms like lion's mane and cordyceps and functional species. And there's always going to be a need for them to have agaricus, or white button mushrooms of various kinds, and then woodier mushrooms, which I think would be a great functional mushroom. It's one of the species that there's a great supply of. It's one of the most highly consumed in China. I'm sure you've had them. It's kind of like stringy jelly type mushroom, dark in color, loaded with beta glucans. But so most of them are growing those species, and that's their main crop. And then they add these specialty crops, which I think it has some really rich, responsible, fair trade type elements there that could be fleshed out. Right now, it's just that we know that they're able to make a really good living off those, and the supply chain is consistent. They've got their techniques down for the turkey tail. It's been about 6-8 years working on the project to get up to the tonnage now. And this year, I think we'll get about 80 tons of dried material, of which will be made into extracts. So that was quite an accomplishment. And it also takes the pressure off the wild harvesting of turkey tail and sort of steadies the quality, because you've got cultivated material under organic conditions that aren't exposed to elements you have no control over. So that was a fascinating trip. The other farms were in Inner Mongolia, and so we went back to Beijing, and then we traveled by van 6 hours out to Inner Mongolia, and that was quite a trip, seeing the countryside by van. We passed the Great Wall, and took a little time on either end of the trip to do some cultural things in Beijing. Saw the Great Wall, Temple of Heaven, and just spent some time in the city. And so I think it's very fresh in my mind. I've mostly been thinking about the things we saw on the audit, a lot of positive things, some things that we'd like to explore further with different species that could be grown, different ways to increase the activity of certain species that we discussed. And we had a couple of chemists from the university that's close to the manufacturing facility that were with us. So it was great to have chemists, and they had, I'd say, really very functional English as well, especially when we were talking about scientific terminology and methods and things. We were speaking the same language. So I think that's part of why you asked, why is that important? We learned that during COVID, when travel was shut down and you couldn't go for in-person visits, that the paper trail audits work fine, but there are certain things that maybe hinder your innovation or the way that you can improve each other's efficiencies as partners in the relationship when you're not in person. It's like having a conversation at the water cooler at work that sparks something fantastic that you wouldn't have had if you were just meeting on a video call. So
that just sounds like such an amazing experience. And you have the whole cultural side of it, you have the science side of it, and then just going back to that really long history in the farming communities and all that generational wisdom. I mean, it's just seriously like a trip of a lifetime. Can you give us some of the main takeaways that you got from spending time with the farmers?
Yeah, that they're doing quite well, actually. It's nice to see farmers doing well with their businesses and ventures, and they have enough to reinvest in equipment, maybe a heater if they need it. But, really, I think leaning into their tradition, they've been growing with just natural elements, and you can picture a shade house like a hoop frame that's open to the elements. And as long as the elements inside that grow house stay stable for pest control, let's say, it's a very traditional way to grow. It's outside and it's low impact. It doesn't use a whole lot of water because you're using, like with reishi mushrooms, they bury a log in the ground. And so the moisture that's in the dirt in the ground helps to keep the culture growing in the log until it can form the mushroom. And so it's fascinating. And it's only actually my second trip to China. My first trip was in my former role as a VP of sourcing. And I was there looking at medicinal plants at ginseng and astragalus and goji berries. I was in similar areas, but these were two new areas, a new area of Inner Mongolia, and then a province right next to the one that I was in Northeast China. So I'm just amazed when I look at the statistics of mushroom consumption in China versus the U.S. We're growing for sure in our consumption of mushrooms, but we eat something like 4 pounds a year on average per person across our population. And I think China's at over 25, 30 pounds per person per year. So you can think of all of the mushrooms that need to be grown just to feed that population. It's an amazing effort, and they're a renewable resource. They're growing on upcycled agricultural products, corn stalks, and things that would get otherwise just composted. And then afterwards, the logs can be composted or re-sterilized and reused for certain species. So,
yeah, you touched on the renewable resource aspect of it. And I know in the leadership profile that's in the magazine, you covered some company goals, and obviously, it's to make the best quality mushroom extracts available is the overarching goal. But part of that is also to look after the well-being of the planet and its inhabitants. And I'm wondering if you could get into that a little bit more about some of the measures you take at Nammex to ensure the longevity of not only the mushroom industry, but the planet itself.
Yeah, I think supporting people's knowledge about mycology in general and what the functions of mushrooms are in the environment is in itself a way to awaken people's knowledge about what are these doing for the environment? How are mushrooms helping with our environmental issues? And we do read different types of research projects where mycelium is being used to remediate certain types of petrochemicals and different types of soil contaminants, and being used to make building materials and things that don't require the use of wood material or plastics, where those can be replaced by something that is renewable and growing off not say a waste product, but a material that all you really need is cellulose for the mycelium to start to digest. And there's some species that would never form a mushroom of mycelium that are being used for soil inoculants to balance the microbiome of the soil. So we're just scratching the surface, really, and talking about 12, 13 different functional mushroom species. But I think when you start to light up about that the same way you would regenerative agriculture and what the plants are doing with the soil to make sure that there is a renewable resource for their immediate environment, then you may think of other things. What am I doing in my life that's not as renewable as it could be? What are the things that I throw away all the time that I don't need to be? So I think maybe that's an indirect way of answering your question on Nammex's behalf, but really supporting organic agriculture for as many years as Nammex did, and actually being the first to institute organic growing practices in China back in the late 80s, 90s. That was when Jeff had done the organic growing training and got the first certifications going in China for organic growing. They are growing without any types of treatments to begin with, but the organic system requires that you track all of your inputs and that you track everything, and so that it can be audited. And so I think he knew that that was going to be a requirement, one, just for import to the U.S. and adoption from the U.S. market from China, but then also it really should be at the forefront of your agricultural system to start to think about what are your inputs and where can you make improvements and be more efficient. So I think for us, the cultivation aspects take out the variability of wild material, which for many years, mushrooms grow so prolifically in the wild, they could just be harvested. So I think that's kind of, if that answers the question of on the economic side, yeah, we're selling a lot of extracts and they're certified organic and they support a certified organic agriculture system. And so could mushrooms even be regenerative organic? Absolutely. Mushroom cultivation is different than soil cultivation, right? So you have different metrics that you'd have to check. And I think that that might be something where we could maybe develop some more metrics around what's happening with mushroom cultivation. But the health of the planet, I think the amount of carbon that gets sunk by the digestion of fungal species and the improvement of just the forest floor to continue to create herbaceous matter that gets broken down. And it's just no doubt that the more people become aware of mushrooms or fungi in that relation, Merlin Sheldrake has some very interesting reading on that subject, and he's has spoken quite strongly on the vastness of the fungal kingdom. So we're really just kind of scratching the surface with things right now, even 30 years into it as a business. So
let's talk a little bit more about the business, because you mentioned it, being passed down. So we have this second generation success story, which is so great in this industry. I love that. Can you talk a little bit more about the company and, what's making the positive difference, like company culture, the leadership style at the company, mentorship? What's going on so great there?
Yeah, well, I've spent my entire working career in the natural products industry, and I've had different, I would call them mentors, but in thinking about the question in advance, I'd say really haven't ever considered that in our working relationship, that you're my mentor and I'm your mentee. But we learn from each other, and so I think the founder of Nammex, Jeff Chilton, and myself, our relationship goes back to me buying whole reishi mushrooms for an herb company for extraction back in 1997, when he was the only person who had any kind of quantities of whole dried reishi mushrooms that were certified organic that I knew were a consistent supply. And so he's been a great mentor in terms of answering questions about mycology and the process of growing mushrooms. And so for years, on the client side, I just saw him giving of his time freely, not just to me, but to other people who were maybe growers, who wanted to start growing in the U.S. as specialty growers. So that really attracted me to his leadership style of being very firm in his beliefs and knowledge, because he trusts his gut instinct. And that was something that I was taught by another mentor, Rick Scalzo, who founded Gaia Herbs. And I worked with Rick for many years. And that was one thing that Rick had sort of impressed to me, was when you have specialized knowledge in something like sourcing and plants, trust your gut instinct when you have a hard challenge that you're trying to make a decision with, because you will learn to nurture that part of yourself and that self-knowledge that knows what's right and wrong without having to really spend too much time on the decision. And invariably, my gut instinct has been correct on those decisions. And so I just sort of learned to trust that. And was that out of a mentor-mentee-ship? No, it was out of a walk on the farm one day when we were just talking about things. And so but for Nammex and the leadership, I mean, I see that in Sky. Sky is an amazing mycologist himself, and he wouldn't tell you that. He's very humble, but I've been out on foraging walks with him, and I ask a lot of questions. That's my nature. Like, I've always asked a lot of questions from any farm visit, and I think I'm inquisitive and I like to learn. And so Sky's been a great teacher as well in terms of, like, the local species out in British Columbia. I still live in North Carolina, and we have amazing things here, an amazing number of species here. And on that front, I'd also say, like, on the mentorship front, it doesn't always have to be an older person mentoring a younger person. There are some mycologists, for instance, here in North Carolina, Todd Elliott, who's the son of Doug Elliott, who's kind of famous in these parts anyway as an herbalist. Todd's an amazing mycologist, and he's done work all around the world on these species and how they interact with different animals, insects. And I mean, having someone like that I can rely on to ask the tough questions is fantastic. And so I think that's at Nammex. That's the inquisitive nature of the company. The leadership style is always that. And remember, Jeff was in the very early days bringing in brown powders from China that were being sold as mushrooms. And that's exactly the challenge that you have is how do we prove this at a time when I was even pre-Déchet. So, you're thinking about quality standards and how this country that's been using them as medicinal products for years has been analyzing and measuring polysaccharides, triterpenes, and things like this. So there have been methods for quite a long time, and that type of inquisitive nature, knowing that your certificate of analysis has to be able to be validated back in the U.S. So it's this way of working with laboratories to develop analytical methods and standards for the mushroom industry is also where I think Nammex excels in leadership in the industry. Just sort of let's all collaborate on this, and we have a long history of collaborating with China, different labs in the U.S. So and it's great to see that Jeff is sort of passing on his leadership role in the company to be more of a chairman of the board and working on the Health Canada license for psilocybe species that Nammex has. So back to his pure research and still very active in the company, but this sort of succession is happening in a generation of leaders within the natural product industry right now. And so it's not just Nammex, it's many organizations, businesses that have a passing on of their leadership roles.
Since I've known of Nammex, one of the things that I've appreciated about the company is it's not just about selling extracts. It's, as you just talked about, Bill, it's about this generational transference of information and knowledge, building a mushroom category that's part of the natural products industry, and ensuring that, for generations to come beyond the founder, this lasts, right? And part of that is stewardship of the industry, of the mushroom category. And then if we focus in on a more detailed aspect of that, it has to do with product transparency and labeling transparency to make sure that you're providing, the extracts that everyone expects. Because as we all know, if you don't, then long term, if people don't get what they expect, if they don't see the benefits of the product, then that turns out to be bad for the industry as far as longevity. And you've been so proficient in ensuring label transparency and really getting into the weeds in that way, I would say. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts and why that's important for the mushroom industry in particular?
Yeah, I think, thank you. You said it better than I could have said it, Todd, about the aspects of Nammex that have been forefront also are transparent labeling, really through educating brands to tell that. Nammex is providing an ingredient. We don't make structure function claims, but we have to be able to tell folks either in the US or regulated in Canada or other places how they can market the mushrooms safely and effectively. And so I think the recent efforts really from Nammex have been focusing on the fungi category or fungal product category in general to take a look at how things are being marketed just beyond your certificate of analysis, just the basic things that are in a supplements facts panel that tell you what the product is. There's certain parts of the Code of Federal Regulations that need to be updated. For one, it doesn't include the fungal kingdom. It includes plants and algae, but not the fungal kingdom. So include the fungal, as we were talking about, mushrooms grow differently, obviously, than plants. They're in an entirely different kingdom. They don't have seeds. They have spores. Some can propagate fine through just mycelium. Some will need spores and mycelium to grow a mushroom. Some types of fungal species will never form a mushroom at all. They just stay as a white fuzzy fungus that's on top of your orange when you see it. So, yeah, I think that, and also in this category, which is growing into foods, where we have certain types of food products that contain some type of fungal organism that's either like, for instance, tempeh, right? People don't really think of that as a fungal product, but tempeh is inoculated soybean that is allowed to ferment and grow into a cake, and it's a traditional food in Indonesia. And so I think that we have an example of certain types of fungal products, but in the Code of Federal Regulations, it's assumed that fungal parts and plant parts are the same, and they're not. We can, for instance, in China, reishi mushroom spore, the spores and different things that they do with the spores from the mushrooms are a completely separate product. So the sale of the fungal products in the entire category now includes mycelium. Mycelium with grain is more than just the mushroom, which people have consumed for centuries, right? So there needs to be some citizen petition that Nammex filed last year with the FDA, has several different requests and got a lot of traction in the industry, positive feedback, and then was followed by another similar citizen petition from a trade organization to ask for clarity in the labeling of fungal products. So I think we have that, but then listen, I think there are bigger concerns with the mushroom category, and we've just seen some recent, let's say, bad news stories about a psychedelic products that were laced with drugs that were harmful, causing death to many people. So we've got issues out there with a marketplace that is so vast, it's very difficult to control what's being sold. So, and it goes beyond, and I want to clarify that those products marketed for psychedelic effects were sort of like a gas station type product, not things that you would find on the stores of health food stores that screen their products properly. And so that's the other thing to remember, is that all natural products and natural things will get thrown into one category for the larger people to consider. But in our industry, we do rely on analytical methods and standards, and there is review by buyers in retail stores, and there is review by online merchants now of certificates of analysis for products. So I think we're headed in the right direction, but I think that getting these things right now will save us a lot of the same things that we've seen with vitamins, single molecule type nutrients that are found in foods, but you wouldn't find them in those amounts in foods, right? So I think we are definitely, as an industry, headed in the right direction, and it's going to take collaboration from people, especially in the mushroom sector, to get together and work on analytical methods and standards for all species. We have them now already, had them for reishi for years, but there's many species, and just like the plants, they all need to have their separate tests developed. So,
do you have any, any call to action or message for people who want to learn more about that or want to get involved?
Yeah, I would check out the AOAC, the BIDSI program, and I always butcher the anagram for that, so I won't try it, but it's the Botanical Integrity Program within AOAC that works on methods for the analysis of various plants, now working on lion's mane. So I would follow their website and subscribe to the journal. I think the other place to go is the United States Pharmacopoeia, or USP. They're working on methods right now for cordyceps. And so typically what happens is you work on a one species that is the largest in commerce. So for instance, in the botanical world, it would be turmeric, elderberry, ashwagandha, these things that have a higher rate of sale have more of a chance for adulteration and issues of quality, right? So starting with lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi mushroom already has some standards that have been developed for quite some time. American Herbal Pharmacopoeia has a monograph for reishi. So I would really avail yourself to the things that already exist for methods about the mushrooms and inform, if you're a manufacturer, your analytical lab, to definitely follow along. And I would say the commercial analytical labs are doing that as well. So if you're using those labs to validate your products in the US, then you're on the right track. I won't mention any names on the show, but I will say that all of the larger labs that you would probably have had on your show are participating in AOAC and USP and the American Herbal Products Association. All the trade organizations are focused around or have working groups or committees around fungal products now. So,
Right. Well, as we're starting to wrap up here just a bit, let's talk about some future developments for Nammex. What's on the horizon? I know you can't maybe tell us Nammex secrets, but just give us a little glimpse of what might be lying ahead for you.
Yeah, I think working to develop the education around ergothioneine, which is a unique antioxidant molecule found in mushroom species. And so in terms of that, we've looked at beta-glucans, triterpenoids, other types of secondary metabolites that occur by species for the mushrooms. So diving deeper into the differentiation of fungal products and learning about the vastly different chemistries between both species and then between how these species are being grown. Mycelium on grain versus a fruiting bodied mushroom has a very different profile. And our goal is not to say which one is better or worse, but just to understand that there is a difference there, and we need to know from an analytical perspective how to qualify those. So I think that, but in terms of our own internal development, I won't tell any secrets, but I will say that there's a couple of different species that we're looking at in terms of their both availability and their health benefit. And it's just constant innovation and constant improvement in our efficiencies internally. And all of the boring things as well, Todd, like, do we use AI? Do we not use it? How do we use it? How many times have we found it wrong from what our experience is? And so, yeah.
All right, excellent. So I know you will keep us posted at WholeFoods Magazine. We'll look forward to hearing about that innovation and the science as it continues to evolve, and keeping an eye on the developments with the labeling and where that all goes. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for telling us all about Nammex and the wonderful history and bright things to come in the future. We appreciate having you.
Great to see you again, Maggie, and you too, Todd. Thank you.